Everyone talks about heartbreak. Almost no one talks about the silence that comes after. That moment when the messages stop, the calls disappear. The room becomes painfully honest. And suddenly, you are left alone with the one person you spent your whole life avoiding, yourself. This is where your real story begins. Not in the chaos, not in the goodbye, but in the unbearable quiet that follows. Because your pain was never only about people leaving. Your nervous system knows that. Your soul knows that. A deeper wound is what their absence reveals. You built pieces of your identity around being needed, around being available, around carrying emotions that were never yours to carry. You became the listener, the healer, the safe place, the one who stayed calm while others collapsed. And somewhere along the way, you confused emotional labor with love. You called it compassion. You called it loyalty. But sometimes, it was fear wearing a compassionate face. Fear is clever like that. It rarely arrives looking dangerous. It disguises itself as kindness, as patience, as endless understanding. You feared disappointing people, feared rejection, feared becoming forgettable. So you learned to stay, even when staying wounded you. Even when your body grew heavy with exhaustion. Even when your heart begged for distance. Because your mind carried a dangerous belief: if you loved deeply enough, sacrificed quietly enough, understood endlessly enough, you would finally become impossible to leave. But life has a painful way of confronting illusions. And now the noise is gone. No emotional emergencies, no one to rescue, no chaos to manage, just silence. And silence is terrifying to an empath. Because silence does not flatter you, it exposes you. The distractions disappear, the performances fall apart, and suddenly, you hear things you spent years drowning beneath obligation, the truth, and what it exposes may disturb you. You were never only grieving people, you were grieving the version of yourself that survived through emotional sacrifice. That version of you worked tirelessly for belonging, measured worth through usefulness, believed love had to be earned through emotional endurance. You gave people pieces of your peace, hoping they would protect your heart in return. But many never saw the cost. And maybe, neither did you. Because when emotional overgiving becomes normal, self-abandonment feels familiar. Your soul adapts to carrying weight it was never designed to hold. And familiar pain becomes difficult to question. So when everyone leaves, a grief becomes layered. You do not only mourn their absence, you mourn the identity built around them, the routines, the emotional purpose, the role you played so well that you forgot it was only a role. And this is where loneliness becomes confusing. Because what hurts is not always abandonment. Sometimes what hurts is withdrawal. Why? Withdrawal from emotional dependency. Withdrawal from constant rescuing. Withdrawal from living as everyone's shelter while standing homeless inside yourself. Your nervous system reacts. Restlessness appears. The urge to reach out, to explain, to fix, to reopen doors your soul quietly wanted closed. Because emptiness feels unbearable when you spent years filling your life with other people's storms. But listen carefully. This silence is not punishment. It only feels that way because your mind was trained to fear stillness. You learned to associate love with emotional effort, with proving, with enduring. So peace feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliarity can feel frightening. But something sacred lives inside this discomfort. Something your distracted heart could never hear before. For the first time, you are no longer performing survival, no longer negotiating your worth through usefulness, no longer translating your pain into patience for people unwilling to hold your tea. Ruth, and that realization is unsettling, because the mask begins to crack, the role begins to fade, and underneath it, you meet someone fragile. Someone exhausted, someone who spent years asking others for permission to matter. That truth hurts. It hurts deeply. But pain is often the first honest language your soul speaks. Not to destroy you, not to shame you, but to interrupt the life you were surviving instead of living. And maybe that is the uncomfortable miracle hidden inside heartbreak. When everyone leaves, the silence finally gives your soul permission to speak. You thought people leaving meant you were abandoned. But your mind may be hiding something darker. Not everyone left because you were unworthy. Some left because your role in their life changed. And that realization burns. Because many connections survive on invisible contracts, unspoken agreements, silent negotiations, not written with words. But with emotional expectations. You comfort me. Yea. I will absorb my storms. You stay available. You understand me endlessly, and in return, I stay. At first, this arrangement feels like closeness. It feels intimate, sacred even. You become important, needed, emotionally central. And for someone who has spent their life searching for belonging, being needed can feel dangerously similar to being loved. But there is a painful difference between the two. Love sees you. Need often uses you. And most people never question that difference until something breaks. What happens when you stop bleeding emotional energy to keep peace? What happens when your boundaries stop apologizing? When your silence no longer means surrender? Something uncomfortable happens. A relationship trembles, and sometimes it collapses. Not because you became cruel, not because your heart hardened, but because systems built upon imbalance cannot survive equality. That truth is difficult to accept, because your compassionate mind immediately say, searches for excuses. Maybe I changed too much. Maybe I became selfish. Maybe I asked for too much. But listen carefully. Healthy connection does not punish honesty. It does not collapse under the weight of self-respect. And when someone grows uncomfortable, the moment your needs become visible, your soul begins learning something your heart resisted for years. This is not cruelty. This is revelation. Your life begins exposing who loved your presence and who depended on your self-erasure. That distinction changes everything, because dependence often disguises itself as affection. People praise your passions, admire your understanding, celebrate your softness. But sometimes, what they truly celebrate is your willingness to disappear. And that discovery cuts deeply. You spent years translating your pain into patience, turning disappointment into understanding, turning exhaustion into loyalty. You explained away disrespect, made peace with emotional inconsistency. Silenced your intuition to protect fragile harmony. You became fluent in emotional accommodation. So fluent, you forgot your own language. And perhaps the hardest truth is this part of you believed endurance made love safer. You believed if you stayed calm enough, forgiving enough, understanding enough, you could protect the connection from collapse. But relationships built upon self-sacrifice create a silent tragedy. The more you disappear, the more people become comfortable with your disappearance, and your soul notices, even when your conscious mind denies it. Your soul keeps receipts, your body keeps score, the exhaustion, the headaches, the anxiety disguised as responsibility. A heaviness you called commitment. Your nervous system records every moment you betrayed your own truth to maintain belonging, and eventually, it refuses the performance. Not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly. You become tired in ways sleep cannot repair. Conversations feel heavier. Your tolerance weakens, your smile grows difficult to manufacture, and suddenly the role you played for years begins suffocating you. That refusal feels like guilt at first, because guilt is often the emotional withdrawal symptom of self-abandonment. You feel guilty for resting, guilty for saying no, guilty for choosing peace over emotional labor. Your mind panics. It whispers old survival fears. You are disappointing people. You are becoming difficult. You are risking love. But beneath that guilt, another feeling waits. Grief. Not only grief for people, but grief for the years you spent negotiating your worth through sacrifice. Grief for the younger version of you who believed love required suffering. And grief can be disorienting, because healing does not immediately feel empowering. At first, it feels lonely, unfamiliar, almost wrong. But if you stay with it, something unexpected emerges. Freedom. Not loud freedom, not dramatic freedom. Quiet freedom, the kind that enters your life softly. The freedom of no longer performing emotional survival. Because empaths often confuse endurance with love. You believe suffering proves devotion. You believe overgiving proves purity. You believe staying proves loyalty. But suffering is not proof of love. Sometimes, it is proof you abandoned yourself first. That truth is difficult to hear, because it dismantles the story your survival created. The story that called self-neglect compassion. The story that turned pain into identity. But your healing does not begin with comforting lies. It does not begin with pretending everyone misunderstood you. And it does not begin by blaming the world. It begins with unbearable honesty. The honesty that asks who taught you that disappearing was the price of connection. And more importantly, what part of you is finally ready to stop paying that price? Here is the discovery nobody prepares you for. Loneliness is not always emptiness. Sometimes it is detox. Not the gentle kind, not peaceful at first, but the painful withdrawal that begins when your soul stops feeding on emotional chaos disguised as connection. You spent so long monitoring other people's moods that you forgot your own emotional language. You knew everyone's pain, but not your own. Okay, you became fluent in tension. You could sense distance before it was spoken, feel disappointment before it arrived. It decked emotional weather shifts inside a room without anyone saying a word. You read silence like scripture. You studied facial expressions. Act, tone, changes, energy shifts. And people admired this sensitivity. They called you intuitive, compassionate, deeply understanding. But what they rarely understood was the cost. Because you were not born emotionally hyper-alert. You adapted into it, not because you were weak, because survival trained you to be. And survival has strange habits. It teaches your nervous system to scan for a danger even inside love, to anticipate instability, to prepare for emotional impact before it happens. Your body learned that safety depended on awareness, on staying prepared, on staying useful. And once survival writes those rules into your system, they become difficult to question. That is why peace can feel unsettling. That calm feels suspicious. That emotional chaos feels strangely familiar. You say you want peace, but sometimes your nervous system mistrusts it, because chaos became predictable. And predictability feels safer than uncertainty, even when it hurts. This is the paradox many never understand. You can become attached to what exhausts you, not because pain feels good, but because pain feels known, and the known feels safer than the unknown. So when everyone leaves, your nervous system panics. Not because solitude is dangerous, but because stillness feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliarity can feel like loss. The silence grows louder. You reach for distractions, old conversations, old wounds, old emotional habits. Your mind searches desperately for something to manage, someone to rescue, some emotional fire to extinguish. Because without chaos, you suddenly face something far more frightening, yourself. And this is why healing feels lonely before it feels liberating. Because you are not only separating from people, you are separating from patterns, from emotional addiction, from unconscious loyalty to pain, from the exhausting identity that convinced you your worth depended on emotional availability. And that separation shakes your identity. Your old role begins dissolving. The caretaker, the emotional translator, the one who absorbs, the one who understands endlessly. And without those roles, you may feel strangely empty, not because you are broken, but because identities built around survival struggle when survival is no longer required. There is grief in that transition. Real grief. Because even onful identities feel familiar. You mourn the role before you understand the freedom waiting beyond it. And this is the uncomfortable middle that few speak about. Healing is not instantly beautiful. It is confusing, uneven, quiet. Some days feel peaceful. Others feel unbearable. You question yourself. Second guess your growth. Wonder whether distance made you colder. Wonder whether boundaries made you selfish. But beneath that uncertainty, something sacred begins happening inside the emptiness. Something subtle. Your inner voice grows louder. Not the fearful voice. Not the voice trained by guilt. Not the anxious narrator shaped by old disappointments. The deeper one. The quieter one. The voice your soul buried beneath years of emotional survival. And at first, you barely recognize it. Because you spent so long listening outward that listening inward feels foreign. But this voice speaks differently. It does not beg. It does not panic. It does not perform. It tells uncomfortable truths. It asks difficult questions. Why do you keep returning to places that shrink you? Why do you apologize for having needs? Why do you confuse emotional exhaustion with love? These questions disturb you, because truth often arrives before comfort. And yet, something inside you softens. For the first time, your emotions are not competing against other people's emergencies. For the first time, you are no longer translating your heart into a language that keeps everyone else comfortable. You begin noticing your own hunger, your own grief, your own desires, and that awareness feels both painful and holy, because after years of emotional survival, you are finally meeting yourself. Not the performed self, not the useful self, the real one. And for the first time, you begin hearing yourself, not as background noise. Not as an afterthought, but as someone worthy of your own attention. And perhaps that is the hidden miracle inside loneliness. It does not always come to empty you. Sometimes it comes to return you to yourself. This discovery is uncomfortable, maybe even disturbing. Part of you enjoyed being needed. Read that again. Part of you felt valuable through sacrifice, not because you were manipulative, not because your heart was false, but because being needed gave you identity. It gave you purpose. It gave you emotional certainty. And certainty is addictive, especially when your life has known emotional unpredictability. Because certainty, even painful certainty, it can feel safer than freedom. Your mind prefers familiar suffering over unfamiliar freedom. That is why you kept returning, explaining, forgiving, overextending. Not always because your heart wanted to, sometimes because your nervous system feared what would happen if you stopped. You thought you were saving connection, preserving harmony, protecting love, but often you were protecting a role, the healer, the rescuer, the emoji. Onel shelter and roles are seductive. They make life understandable, predictable. You know who you are, you know what people expect. You know how to remain emotionally necessary, and necessity can feel intoxicating, because when people need you, you rarely have to face the frightening question underneath it all. Who am I when I am no longer useful? That question terrifies more people than loneliness itself. And maybe it unsettles you too, because when that role disappears, you feel lost. 8. Disoriented. Almost invisible. Not because your value disappeared, but because your identity became attached to emotional service. The role had become your reflection. And when reflections shatter, confusion follows, because roles can become prisons. Beautiful prisons. Respected prisons. Even loving prisons. But prisons all the same. This is the shadow empaths rarely admit, and shadows grow strongest when hidden. Sometimes your kindness becomes entangled with self-neglect. Sometimes some passion becomes camouflage for fear. Not intentional fear, not conscious manipulation, but quiet fear, ancient fear, fear of irrelevance, fear of emptiness, fear of becoming emotionally unnecessary, fear of facing your own unmet needs. Because tending to other people can become a convenient escape from tending to yourself. It feels noble, purposeful, even spiritual. But if you listen carefully, you may notice something painful. You were often more comfortable carrying other people's wounds than sitting with your own. You became skilled at emotional rescue. Not only because others needed saving, but because rescuing distracted you from your own hunger, your own loneliness, your own unanswered questions. And survival loves distraction. It convinces you that staying busy with other people's pain is generosity, when sometimes it is avoidance. That truth is difficult to face, because it challenges the identity you spent years protecting, the compassi. Octanate one, the endlessly understanding one, the strong one, the one who asks for little and gives everything. But here is the uncomfortable reality: self-sacrifice can become its own addiction. Not because suffering feels good, but because suffering feels familiar. And familiarity creates emotional gravity. You keep orbiting the same patterns, the same dynamics, the same emotional negotiations. Because uncertainty feels more frightening than exhaustion. So you explain again, forgive again, shrink again. Not always out of love. Sometimes out of fear disguised as loyalty. And fear wears convincing masks. It calls itself patience, understanding, emotional maturity. But fear always carries a hidden cost. And eventually, your soul grows tired of paying it. This is why awareness changes everything. Not dramatic awareness, not overnight transformation, just honest seeing. The moment you see the pattern, you stop worshiping it. You stop romanticizing suffering. You stop calling self-erasure compassion. And suddenly, the spell weakens, because unconscious patterns survive through invisibility. A moment they become visible, their power begins collapsing. And this is where your power quietly returns, not through revenge. Not through punishment, not through emotional walls built from bitterness. Those walls only create different prisons. No, your power returns through truth. The quiet truth that no longer negotiates its own existence. You stop begging to be understood, because you realize understanding cannot be forced. You stop auditioning for belonging, because belonging purchased through self-abandonment is not belonging at all. You stop shrinking your needs to preserve fragile connections. And something unfamiliar begins happening inside you. Peace. Not perfect peace, but grounded peace. The kind that no longer depends on approval. The kind that survives misunderstanding. Because for the first time, you are no lone. Performing worthiness. You are no longer translating your soul into something easier to consume. And there is grief in that freedom. Yes. But there is also dignity. Because beneath the collapsing role, beneath the disappearing performance, beneath the healer and rescuer and emotional shelter, someone real has been waiting. Someone who does not need exhaustion to prove love. Someone who does not need suffering to earn presence. And when you finally meet that version of yourself, something inside you becomes beautifully unshakable. Not harder, not colder, just finally free. And now you stand in unfamiliar territory. The silence still exists, but it no longer terrifies you. Not because life suddenly became easier, not because pain disappeared, but because something inside you changed. You no longer hear silence as abandonment. You hear it as truth. And truth sounds different after survival loses its grip, because you finally understand what everyone leaving hide revealed. It was never punishment. It was exposure. Life removed the noise so you could hear what your soul had been whispering for years. The whispers were always there, beneath the chaos, beneath the overthinking, beneath the endless emotional negotiations. But noise has a way of drowning wisdom, and you spent so long managing storms that you forgot your soul was quietly asking for shore. You were never meant to carry every wound, never meant to become the emotional home for people unwilling to build one within themselves. Never meant to abandon yourself to preserve connection, and never meant to confuse emotional exhaustion with love. But survival taught you otherwise. It taught you that love must be earned, protected, maintained through sacrifice. So you worked tirelessly. You overextended, over-explained, overgave. Not because your heart was weak, but because it was searching for safety in places that required your disappearance. And now you see it. Not woo. Ate bitterness, not with blame, but with painful clarity. And clarity changes everything, because healing is not revenge. Healing is recognition. Recognition of the moments you betrayed your own needs for approval. Recognition of the times your soul whispered no while your fear answered yes. Recognition of the quiet grief carried by the version of you that survived through self-erasure. And strangely, this honesty does not break you. It frees you. This is the shift, the small truth that changes everything. You do not need to become colder. You do not need to stop loving. You do not need to kill your empathy. That was never the lesson. The world has enough numb hearts. Your sensitivity was never the enemy. Your compassion was never the mistake. The mistake was believing your soul had to bleed to prove its value. You only need to stop offering your soul as proof of your worth. Read that carefully, because this realization separates survival from awakening. We are not born to audition for love, not born to shrink your truth into emotional convenience. Not born to exhaust yourself earning a place that asks for your disappearance. That is the awakening. And awakenings are rarely dramatic. They arrive quietly, like a door opening inside you. A door that was locked by fear, by guilt, by old identities you mistook for selfhood. And when that door opens, you see love differently. Real empathy does not destroy you. Real love does not demand your disappearance. Real connection does not punish your boundaries. And real healing begins the moment you stop asking, why did everyone leave me? And start asking, what part of me finally stopped leaving myself? That question changes your life, because suddenly the story shifts. You are no longer the abandoned character waiting for rescue. You become the witness, the participant, the soul brave enough to tell the truth. And the truth is, not every ending was rejection. Some endings were protection. Some departures were invitations, not invitations back into loneliness, but invitations back into yourself. And after everyone leaves, something extraordinary remains. You, not the performed version, not the exhausted version. Not the endlessly accommodating shadow who survived through emotional exhaustion, the real one, the one hidden beneath years of emotional labor, the one who still carries softness without surrendering dignity, the one who no longer mistakes suffering for devotion. And perhaps that was the hidden miracle all along. Your loneliness was not the end of your story. It was the doorway, the sacred interruption, the quiet collapse of everything that kept you disconnected from your own soul. Because some doors do not open outward, they open inward. And maybe this entire journey, the heartbreak, the silence, the grief, was never leading you toward loss. Maybe it was leading you toward return to your own voice, your own peace, your own sacred center. And now, your soul stands at that doorway, no longer begging, no longer performing, no longer frightened by its own reflection, just awake, present, unafraid. And finally, after years of searching for home inside other people, or ready to belong to itself. Before you leave,